Hello, my name is Sylvester Henderson. I am the CEO and President of Professor for Life Incorporated. I am so honored this early morning to be able to interview and introduce Dr. Kalana Greer, who is a clinical psychologist and associate professor at National University. Welcome, Dr. Greer.
Thank you so much, Sylvester. It's truly a privilege to be able to share this platform with you. You know, you are an endeared person in my life and always will be. So this is really special for me as well.
Very much so. Well, Dr. Kalana, I like that. Can you introduce yourself to our digital media academic world? Tell us where you went to school. Tell us about your training, your education, and all those wonderful things from your early years on up.
Absolutely. So born in Oakland, raised in Hayward, went to Hayward High, matriculated to UC Berkeley, where I met Professor Henderson. And while I was there, majored in psychology, as well as African American studies, and did a unofficial minor in theater. I've always loved theater and the arts. And so, you know, while I was at Cal, I had the privilege of singing in the Young Inspiration Gospel Choir with Sylvester. And so that was a very amazing experience. Actually, it was one of the things that sustained me there, right? You know, when you're at college, you have a lot of things pulling you in a lot of different directions, lots of responsibilities. So the choir was, you know, really special for me and a huge part of my self-care. So I graduated from there, and initially I was going to go to medical school. And I decided that what happened was I was going to do a post-bac. And I needed a couple more math classes because the ones that I had taken, I didn't get quite as high as scores as I needed to get in the particular program that I wanted to. So they sent this letter. They said, hey, we'll give you conditional admission as long as you take these courses. Well, during that period, I saw a episode of Grey's Anatomy. And on the episode, there is this one episode, and the young man had a neck wound. And the nurse did something that nurses never should do, because when you have a wound to that magnitude, you should ask for help. But she asked the young man to hold the wound while she goes, you know, gets whatever she needs. So she leaves the room, and the guy takes his hand off the wound, and blood started splattering all over the room. And it was in that moment that I knew that I did not want to be a medical doctor. And I'm not afraid of blood, but what I realized is I don't like wounds. I'm not a physical wound person. And I was going to go into psychiatry. You know, when you become a medical doctor, you got to do all the rounds before you can go into your specialty. So I decided that it wasn't for me. So I looked around, and I found at the time, National University was John F. Kennedy University, and they had a clinical psychology program. And I checked that out. I checked out a couple of other schools in the area, and I really fell in love with John F. Kennedy because they had a multicultural social justice emphasis that really spoke to me. And when I was on the campus, I noticed that the faculty was diverse and I was represented there. And the way that they approached students was very down to earth and welcoming. And so I got my education there formally. I got my doctorate in clinical psychology. And while I was there, I did a lot of training with different populations around the Bay Area. And I stayed there for 6 years, completing my education. And when I got into the field, I started at Kaiser. And so the John F. Kennedy model is a practitioner scholar model. And what that means is that, yes, we focus on research, but the emphasis is using the research and the theory to be a good practitioner, and then taking what you learn from the clinical practice back to the research and the theory. And so there's this cycle that happens for practitioner scholars that we really love, but our heart is in the clinical work. So I ended up at Kaiser, and I was there for several years.
Wow. And now you are a full tenure associate professor of psychology, clinical psychology at National University, which was John F. Kennedy University, right?
Correct. So National
Okay.
Law, John F. Kennedy, I want to say in 2013 or 14. And at that point, it was still, John F. Kennedy was still its own institution. And so we continued as normal. And I took some time, obviously, away, worked at Kaiser for several years, decided to come back and to be an adjunct professor because they needed professors at that time. And so when I started, I did some elective courses, and I did one of their core courses, which is obviously a course I took when I was in the program, which is called Integrated Professional Seminar. And the Integrated Professional Seminar, there's a level 1, a level 2, and a level 3. And so the level 1 is for first year students. And in that class is where the students really start to understand the value of cultural humility and being sensitive to difference and actually appreciating difference. Because as a therapist, you can do a lot of harm to your clients if you don't have a certain amount of humility when you approach a person's life, whether they look like you or not. Right.
That's right.
So I taught that class, and it was so much work. It was so much work, Sylvester. So I told them, I said, hey, if you guys want me to come back, you got to hire me full time. And they did.
Wow. Well, you know what? Just watching you is like, wow, because I've known you since a young woman. And it's like amazing because you've transformed yourself into such an admirable professional and such a great professional. It's just very rewarding for me to watch and to hear you speak and explain yourself, because there is a language and a skill you develop as you mature in your profession. And you can sure tell that your profession, you wear it well.
I so appreciate that. But if you ask my family and my friends, it annoys them. Right? So it works great when I'm working. But my family and my friends are like, hey, take that psychologist hat off. We don't right now.
Now, you know what is interesting to me is that this is just something I'm going to kind of place into one of our questions. That in many of when some of the students go to UC Berkeley and they transfer to PhD programs, they bypass the master's degree and go straight to the doctorate degree. Can you explain the fact? Now, what I'm told is that if you decide to graduate early, they can give you a master's degree.
Actually, no. So for our program, I don't know about others, but for the Psy.D, it's non-terminal. So you do get awarded just sort of as a token of your time and your effort, this non-terminal degree. I don't know if you can kind of see it. One of them's there. But you can't do anything with it. You can't get clinical hours. You can't practice. You have to finish the doctorate. So we do allow some students to join the doctoral program, and we consider a couple of things. If you don't have a master's degree, we consider life experience. We consider maturity. Obviously, we want people that have clinical experience. That's a plus. But we do such a good job in our program of introducing people to the field and meeting them where they're at. So we have lots of folks that have been practicing in the field for quite some time with the masters. And we have some folks that have zero clinical experience, but they have some of the psychology classes, so they have an idea of what it's like. But we introduce them to everything they need to know the first 2 years in the program so that they can practice ethically.
And how large are your classes at National University? And tell us some of the classes that you teach at National University.
Yeah, so our typical cohort size is about 30. And so the classes are, typically around anywhere 7 to 10, depending on the nature of the class. If it's a seminar, we try to keep them smaller, under 10 people. If it's a foundational, more lecture style class, then it can go anywhere from 20 to 30. But most of our classes are pretty small. And so as I was saying earlier, I taught that IPS 1 class, and again, it was an introduction to multicultural humility, really understanding the different types of target identities and diversity and struggles that different kinds of people deal with. That could be anything from race to gender, sexual orientation, religion, etc. And then they matriculate into year 2, and year 2 is when they start their clinical practice. And we have a professional seminar that year as well that I've also taught. And that year is when they start to learn clinical theory. And so while they're at their site, they're starting to learn clinical theory, and they have all these moving parts that are helping them to create a clinical identity and foundation.
Now, do you feel that your training at UC Berkeley, which recently again was ranked as the #1 undergraduate public institution in the world, do you feel that that really helped to prepare you as a young intellectual and scholar to transfer to John F. Kennedy University?
1000%, Sylvester. I had zero problems with essays. I had zero problems with the academic portion. The learning curve for me was the clinical part, because again, I didn't get them, some students don't have the master's, and I was one of those students. I didn't have the clinical master's. And so I was starting from scratch. But in terms of, the academia part, I felt very strong and very prepared. And actually my writing was probably the strongest of my cohort. When I see certain students coming from different institutions, some of them really struggle with their writing, even at the doctoral level.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
You know what? As a professor, and I've been around so long, I'm an old man. I'm not young like you. You know what? I've noticed that a lot of emphasis in education has been watered down.
Mhm.
Because when we were coming along, well, first of all, like when I tell people all the time, when I started at San Francisco State University, obtaining a Bachelor's of Music and a Master's of Arts in Music, I said I started right after they transitioned from a state college. So the requirements for teaching in the institution were different.
Mhm.
All of the professors that I had were master holders, pretty much. My entire undergrad and my graduate program. Very few had PhDs at that point. It was very, very few, because we were pretty much practitioners in the field.
Mhm.
We were actually working actively, not a research institution. So I think it's interesting that my time at UC Berkeley, I can see people ask me what was the difference in the students, and I always say that the students during your time and the 20 years I was at Berkeley, those Berkeley students, those minority students that I came into contact with, and the non-minority ones, they had brilliant minds.
Yes.
All of you had brilliant minds.
Yes.
All of you had the ability. There was something about the intellect of all of you that were able to sustain questions of why. Questions of, you're building the house, not just looking at the carpet, but evaluating the soil from which the house rests on.
Absolutely.
To understand why. And so it's a mindset. Whereas many times in the state universities and the community colleges, which are wonderful, they concentrate on, the carpet is red. Why is the carpet red? They don't concentrate on the intellectual capacity.
Right.
Why is the soil great for this home to be built on? So there is a difference. It doesn't mean that the students can't achieve it, but there is a difference in the intellectual growth of the mind of those students who come from research institutions.
Absolutely. And I would say there's also a value of not just using education as a means to an end, like some folks do when, for example, they go to a community college or a trade school. They're really trying to get into the field and start making money. When you're looking at folks that go to, these really prestigious universities, they have a genuine interest in educating themselves. They have a genuine interest in understanding life and really excelling in their careers. When I look at the folks that I went to college with, they are doing some amazing things.
Absolutely.
I'm impressed by some of some of the things that some of my peers are doing. And I don't know if you remember this, but I pledged Delta Sigma Theta when I was there. And I have 8 line sisters. Of my 8 line sisters, we got a few doctorates. We got everybody has a master's. People own their businesses. One of my line sisters, she is working with Beyonce and all of the professional artists and entertainment folks in Hollywood. And, so I just look at these people that are around me and I'm in awe because I'm like, these are my friends. These are people I went to school with.
That's right.
Just from Hayward.
That's right.
How did I get here?
That's right. You know what? I've always said that the students that I had, especially in the choir program, all of you are doing amazing things.
Yeah.
From being like, clinical psychologists to doctors to working in the White House currently, to being judges, to being medical doctors, to being scholars, to being other professors. I think Dr. Charles Lee is now at Columbia University, and he concentrates on sociology and doing work, especially understanding prison reform and a lot of things around social conditions for prisoners.
Right.
And it's like a lot of people are doing. Dr. Talia Holden Brooks, I think her last name is now. She's, I think she's a therapist for Kaiser, correct?
Yeah, we worked together for several years.
Okay.
It was wonderful for us to, having gone to college together and then have that experience at Kaiser as clinical psychologist. It was wonderful having a familiar face close by.
Wow.
And, really impressed by her and really impressed by all of these people that you're mentioning, including, Dr. Lee, because we were just kids when we met.
That's right.
And to see everyone working in their fields, but working in their fields in a way where it is admirable and respected. And I just got to throw this piece in there. And I know that, this is something that you're okay with, but also God-fearing people. These are really well-rounded people that are not just ambitious. They understand where that drive and where that love and where that work ethic comes from. That's right. It comes from a love of God, but also a love of people.
That's right.
And so we don't have a bunch of capitalists just running around, just making money for the sake of making money.
That's right.
Right.
You're
really
making money for
people.
That's right. Can you describe your work as a clinical psychologist, researcher, and business owner? Because I know you have your own business, psychology therapy business, right?
Yes.
And then you work in 2 capacities, one in your own business, and then work as an associate professor for National University.
Yeah, so I really enjoy the other class that I teach 2 year-long classes right now. And one of them is our 3rd-year students who are in advanced clinical training. They're refining their understanding of theory and its application. They are in their advanced practicum. And so we really prepare them to go out into the field for their full-time internship to be able to practice under a licensed clinician, but pretty independently. And so I also teach first-year students. I introduce them to psychopathology. So really helping them to understand our diagnostic manual and the different disorders and, some introduction to how to treat them. And so that is sort of the academic portion of it, but we do a lot more in our program because it's so small. We have I think there's 8 of us, 8 faculty right now. The pandemic hit us really hard. And so our numbers dwindled during the pandemic, partly because of the pandemic. People did not want to do online education, number 1. But number 2, when National took over JFK, we had to go through a reaccrediting process. And so our program was exactly the same, but because of the name change, they made us go through everything. And so during that period, when a student sees that you don't have full accreditation, they shy away from that.
Absolutely.
So numbers got really, really small for a while. We have an incoming class now that is about 25, which is closer to our normal size. So there's a lot of support that we give the students, from individual attention to helping with their dissertations. Um, we essentially run the program. So a lot of programs have lots of administrative staff. We work for National University, but we're a really hands-on faculty because we know the inner workings of our program. And there's lots of nuances when you're in a clinical psychology program. Because we are accredited by APA, we have to follow a lot of specific rules. And we understand that. And sometimes National University, as a big entity with all these other programs, doesn't necessarily understand the nuance of that. So that is what I do at National University. In terms of my private practice, I have, a small caseload of about 10 to 15 people that I hold. And, I see individuals, I see couples, I see families. I do consultation with businesses. Sometimes I offer workshops to churches and community partners. So I'm all over the place, Sylvester. Whatever you need, they're calling me for the mental health, expertise, and I'm happy to provide it.
Wow. How long have you owned your own business, and was it as a result of you leaving Kaiser and then going into the academic realms at National University?
Yeah, so I decided to leave Kaiser during the pandemic and start the private practice, and I thought that I would struggle. I opened an office in Pittsburgh, California, January 2020. So this was a couple months before the pandemic hit, and the pandemic hit right when I got my first couple of clients, and I never got to see one client in that office. And I held on to that office for about a year and a half.
Wow.
But what happened is that I got comfortable with telehealth, seeing clients via Zoom, and my business just took off. And so, I went from 1 to 2 clients to having all of these clients. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the full-time position at National was open. And so I also took that on.
Wow.
So it was an adjustment for the first couple of years of doing both. Now I have a pretty well-oiled wheel, so, I make it happen.
So you stay pretty actively and very busy now.
Yeah, but it's beautiful because not everyone that teaches clinical psychology students have a private practice. Some of us do. What is beautiful about it is we get to keep our clinical skills fresh, and we get to take those perspectives to our students and say, hey, I'm not just teaching you from the books. I'm not just teaching you from the research. I'm teaching you from what I'm seeing in real time. And the students really appreciate that.
Wow. How does your instruction support the concept of higher education? You primarily work with graduate students, right?
Mm-hmm. Doctoral students.
Tell me, how does your instruction support the concept? Because I would love to hear, I ask this question all the time. What do you define as being higher education?
Yeah, I believe higher education for practitioner scholars is really understanding responsibility, right?
Okay.
You become a leader, and then you have to be responsible with that leadership. And so for practitioner scholars, how do you become an ethical, effective leader, right? And in our field, you become that way by looking at the evidence-based research. You become that way by being well-rounded. You become that way, again, by being a practitioner that is centered in humility for difference, right? One of the things in this country, when we talk about DEI, people want to get rid of it, but it's the core of how we've been able to build this country. When you embrace difference, we know that difference creates innovation. It creates progressive change that helps to benefit everyone. And so we are creating practitioner scholars that add to a society where people are not only appreciated, but get better at either being a husband or being an employee, just being a human, but also get better at just understanding their own wellness.
Wow.
Right.
Now, can you describe some of your research ideas and how your findings have improved learning for some of your students of color?
Yeah, so I'm not heavy into research. One of the things I like about my program is that you can kind of lean into the research if you love research, or you can lean into your clinical work. So
Okay.
for those of us that don't have a clinical practice, they're heavy into research and that's their thing. For me, I'm not heavy into research, but I will say that some of my research interests are around narcissism. And so one of the things that I've seen heavily in my practice that I was quite surprised by is how much narcissistic abuse people experience in relationships. And so, really leaning into understanding how that affects people. And it's interesting because
Absolutely.
with Google and YouTube, you have access to so much information now, but many people still don't know what this thing is, even though so many people are experiencing it, right?
Right.
And so when they come to me and I say, hey, go Google this thing, and they come back and they go, oh my God, Dr. Greer, that is my experience exactly, you know? So um, I don't do a lot of formal research around narcissistic abuse, but I am interested in that. I'm interested in trauma. Childhood trauma is so widespread, not just in, you know, the African American community, but in all communities. And I'm glad that I have this platform because I want to say it publicly. Mental health primary needs to be in primary care. So just how we get our physical checkups, we need to be getting mental and emotional checkups.
That's right.
A lot of the children who develop into adults with unresolved trauma, they could have been helped as children and avoided a lot of pain and suffering and problems had somebody caught it in primary care.
If people don't think about, especially coming from my time,
Right.
you know, we didn't talk about stuff. You know, it wasn't part of our socialization.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you could have had these traumatic experiences growing up as a kid, and it was kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and you realize that it affects you or infects your environment. And then sometimes when you have not had this as part of your learning process or living process, you get a certain age and you don't even know what to do.
That's right.
You're just kind of stuck.
That's right. And you'd be surprised because I have clients that are teenagers. I don't work with little kids. The youngest I work with is 13, but 13 all the way to 80, right? And the way that a person experiences trauma obviously is going to be different depending on where you are in the lifespan. But to have a 50-year-old sit in my office and say, whoa, Dr. Greer, I've never thought of it this way. I never even realized I had this much trauma. And then to really deal with it and process it and lift that weight, it's amazing to me. It's really beautiful. And I feel so incredibly blessed to be able to help people to see themselves in a positive way.
So it's a ministry as well as a profession, as well as a medical profession. It's all wrapped up into one.
Absolutely.
You know. Now,
Absolutely.
can you describe what you would consider your most significant clinical accomplishment, and please describe, not names or nothing like that, but just an overall, you know, that you really look back at and you feel with pride, and
Yeah.
you say because you really made a real difference in a theory or a life or a family or what have you.
Actually, I'm going to take the business perspective. No one coached me on how to start a business. Actually, I took a business class at Los Medanos for about 3 months. I didn't even finish the semester because I was pregnant at the time and it just was too much for me. But in those 3 months, I learned the basics of business. And from that understanding and Googling and YouTubing, I was able to start my private practice on my own. I had no mentor. I read no books. I started this private practice from the ground up. And I'm happy to say that I have a very, very, very successful business that I created myself.
Wow,
And that is my greatest accomplishment, not just being a clinician, but being a business owner.
that's right. I listened this morning to a interview I did with a panel of business and science professionals a couple of years ago, back in 2021. And one of the professors, a good dear friend of mine, talked about one of the greatest things that we never teach is for you to become not just a capitalist, but to be able to control your own destiny.
Correct.
And to not depend on a structure or a system. One of the things that I'm fortunate of, because I'm turning 65 this year, and I'm actually proud of that. And I've gone through many challenges, positive family challenges, but I've had major national success simultaneously. But one of the greatest things that I could have done for myself, my ex-wife, and my kids and everyone is the fact that I started a real estate business. I didn't necessarily know all of the perfections around it, but I started very, very young because I was really impressed with the grandfather of the Hilton girls. And I was sitting at home one day, and I must have been 23, 24. I don't even think I was 25 yet. And I remember hearing, I saw these rich girls. And I thought, wow, I never see African American people live like this. Now, some of the girls were irresponsible, but in terms of how they were handling their grandfather's legacy. But what I concentrated on was that there was a legacy that was created for them to live aloof. And that took someone having to start. And woe for me, that was where I began my journey of Mr. Gospel Properties.
Yeah.
And so that's where I began my business. So I say that to say to you that I'm so proud of you, because I think it's very important. National University and whatever university you work for, they're going to do what they can do within the constraints of their system.
Right.
But what you do to satisfy all of your own passions, avoid of all these restrictions, because people are paying money in state policies, and you start your own business.
That's right. There's 3 things that I learned from you. One is tenacity.
Thank you.
You don't stop just because of how you feel.
That's right.
Number 2 is to be multifaceted. And so I learned very early that you got to have different, irons on the stove.
Absolutely.
Right? And then the other thing is that I learned from you is that wealth is really important. I think one of the things that we kind of shy away from sometimes in African American community, particularly if you are Christian or Christian influenced, is to not emphasize the importance of wealth. And the reality is that you need wealth to do a lot of things in this life. And the wealth gap between African Americans and white folks, for example, is so big. And we tend to shy away from prioritizing decisions that generate wealth.
That's right.
And so one of the reasons why I left Kaiser is I knew that there was a ceiling that I was never going to be able to surpass. And that was going to present problems for me as a mother of 4 children. So how do I, as a mother of 4 children, generate enough income to take care of them and to send them to college and do these and have family vacations and have at least a middle class lifestyle? That's and right. So, the business for me has been liberating.
Wow.
It's been completely liberating. And I've made more money, not to, I'm not patting myself on the back or tooting my own horn. I'm saying this because I want to inspire other people to start their own businesses. I've made way more money than I ever thought I would. It blows my mind. And I'm so thankful to God for that. And it's important for people in our community to know that they can also start their own businesses. And it can be a small scale business, something you just kind of do on the side, or a full corporation where you change lives and you hire people, and we can do that. And that's something that I really want us as a community to lean into, because we used to.
That's right. Well, you know what, Dr. Kalana Greer, I want to thank you for saying that. You are so right that I'm not sure where developing resources became this sort of biblical wrong thing to do.
Yeah.
People use scripture as a way of money is the root of evil, but no one said that you have to use money to do evil.
Correct.
You need money to survive. You need money to educate your children.
And people that are in leadership positions need money to help other people to do the things that they're doing, right? We want to pass the torch.
That's
it's
right.
hard to do that when you don't have the resources to help other people to do it.
That's right. So I commend you. You continue, my dear niece, I'm going to call. You continue to preach that it's important to educate yourself, but part of education is to realize holistically that whatever area of education you stop, you still have other areas in your life that you need to address. And Absolutely. One of them is that, does your education give you the understanding to think more globally?
That's right.
And to understand how you need to develop a lifestyle where you're in control of it.
That's right.
You know, let me ask you this. What do you consider to be your best book or creative project that you've created or you've read?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, I don't have a specific book in mind, but there have been so many books on African and Black psychology that shaped my identity and was the foundation of the professional that I am. One of the things that I am clear about at this point in my journey is that you got to know where you come from and you got to know who you are. And, you know, Black psychology for me was the correction of a lot of miseducation through the American primary school system, right? And so I began to understand, you know, we say in our community, we're from kings and queens, and we are, but it's deeper than that. You know, you're from people that had culture and courage and integrity and a worldview that's very different than the Western world. And to understand that this is not the only reality that we have to embrace. There's different ways of being, not just from even the African-centered way of being, but other countries and places around the world that have an influence that is just as great as, you know, the continent of Africa. But for me, those African Black psychology books were invaluable. And I have a couple behind me, and I can't think of the authors off the top of my head because it's been so long since I read them. But I do encourage, you know, the listeners to, if you have never read a Black psychology book, pick it up, you know, and it will be mind blowing if you've never done that.
Wow. Thank you for that. What challenges have you, and I'm sure there's been many, have you faced as a woman of color in higher education? What are some of the challenges?
Because I am a woman of color, but also because I'm very young presenting. You know, I'm a mother of 4. You know, I consider myself to be somewhat seasoned. But when people see me, they think I'm younger. They think I'm their peer. Right? And so there's a lack of respect sometimes from the doctoral students that I have to quickly correct. And that's been a challenge. Right? And I have to do it with humility, right? Because these are grown adults, you know, and I want them to also feel respected by me. But when you're in academia, you got to give respect where respect is due. And, you know, you have to, as a student, contribute to the professionalism of the environment. You can't go around disrespecting your professors or your clinical supervisors thinking that you know everything just because you've Googled it. And sometimes they do, right? Or even sometimes the students with masters, because they have this higher education, sometimes they don't think that they're teachable. And we say, hey, look, you're always teachable. One of the expectations, if you will, in the psychological community is that you're a lifelong learner.
Absolutely.
We don't ever stop learning.
Never.
And never. Right? And not only do we never stop learning about theory and phenomena, we never stop learning about ourselves. We will always have blind spots, that we need to be responsible and accountable for. And so, sometimes it's just a gentle conversation to say, "Hey, let me help you with your blind spot. Let me show you how you're showing up so that you can refine yourself professionally and create an ambiance that is going to be beneficial to all students, not just you."
You know what? That's a good thing you said that. I recall years ago, and when young people are students of mine, they always have to call me Professor Henderson. I don't respond. So I remember a young lady came into the office one day and said, "Oh, hi, Sylvester." Now, I didn't even turn around. And she just sat there and she just, "Oh, Sylvester." And then she said, "Oh, Professor Henderson." Then I turned around and said, "How can I help you?" It was simple. And then she figured out, oh. And the reason I did that was because we were equal in terms of human value.
That's
But we
right.
were not equal in terms of our position.
Absolutely.
And that there's a certain level of respect that you must be able to address and realize there are things that are appropriate and there are things and there's language that's inappropriate.
Absolutely.
Having said that, please share your community work. Now, this is a kind of a crazy question, and I'm not sure that it's a clear question, but I think you'll get it. Please share the community work that you've accomplished for the improvement of protected classes with respect to our current equity versus equality movement.
Yeah.
Because that's a big one right now.
Well, I teach and clinically see all kinds of people, and I love that about being a psychologist. But I also love my people, right? And so a lot of the community work that I have done has been either in the African American church, just offering mental health education. I've also helped being on different panels and doing workshops around domestic violence in the African American community, so for African American women. And just generally speaking, just being in different spaces in the community where I show up and I'm a voice and say, "Hey, let's not forget about, the mental health aspect of what's going on here." And so I've also participated in different panels, even as far as Oakland. I'm in East Contra Costa County, but as far as Oakland and saying, "Hey, it's fine for you to, for example, want to be a consumer of retail, but let's also be a consumer of your own wellness and mental health." And so bridging the gap in those spaces. So, I do all kinds of things in the community. When people hit me up, I say, "Okay, let's do it."
That's great. That's great. That's wonderful. It's because that supports the concept of giving the stool to stand on and look over the fence,
Mhm.
equity, but it also is equal in that it not just supports people from the underserved community, because how I look at it is that when you support people from the underserved community, they go out in the community and they support a mass amount of people,
Yeah.
the world in general. So in
I
reality, you're always supporting the world.
Absolutely. I believe that the African American woman is still the least underserved and, the most abused population in the United States. And um, because of that, I think, that is where my passion lies is helping African American women mostly. But what happens is, interestingly enough, most of my practice is professional Black women. And while they are thriving in their careers most of the time, personally, they are often suffering.
Absolutely.
So for me, a lot of my work is not public and it's not in the community, it's behind closed doors, but there's definitely this protected population of African American women who are leaders in our communities, um, who need lots and lots of support. They're not only showing up for their children and their husbands, but they are being stretched and having such high expectations put upon them in their workspaces, and other aspects of the community. And so offering them a space where they can get support and a kind of support that they're not given anywhere else has been just valuable for them and their wellness. And so I can't, say all of my tricks on here in terms of how I support them. But it's amazing when women come to me and they say, wow, Dr. Greer, I've never had someone support me like this.
That's wonderful. You have inspired me this early morning, I should say. I am so proud of you.
Thank you.
And all that you have done. What an incredible woman you've become, professional you've become, mother that you are, wonderful mate, just all around person. But you have such a great purpose in your life, and you're so wise. I would like to ask you just one other question.
Okay.
And can you discuss some of your future goals, future projects, and innovations, and share any other thoughts you would like to communicate to our audience here?
Absolutely. So my most immediate goal is to get these two young men that I have into their respective colleges.
Okay.
I'm on mom duty first. But professionally, I would eventually like to be a dean
Okay.
of a college. I see myself moving out of the teaching aspect of my professional career at some point. And in terms of clinical work, I would really love to open up a group practice where I do less direct work and help to develop clinicians who are already in their professional careers.
Wow.
So
You
that's
know what? I can see you doing all of that. While you were talking, I was just thinking to myself, this woman should be a president of a college. I really was. I was sitting there thinking, because you have such an ambience and a great presence about yourself, and you have a confidence about yourself that only comes from life experience, but it also comes from information that you've learned through the journey of life. Know that in my heart, I completely love and respect you. And I'm so grateful that you were part of my past and you're part of my future. And it is so nice to be able to watch all that God has done for you, your family, how you have nurtured your family, but how you had enough wisdom, Dr. Kalana, to nurture your passion and to be open to learn.
Yeah.
That is such a gift, because so many of us who come from urban communities, we simply reject that gift. And so you find a person sometimes from urban communities that was doing nothing with their life significantly at 18, and you come back and see them at 40, and they're talking the same foolishness.
Yeah. I have to say, not only is it about, education and information, it's also about faith.
That's right.
And, I was introduced to faith at a very young age, have had a strong relationship with God since I was a young kid. And I think, one of the things that we don't emphasize enough is that your faith should help you to be well-rounded. It should
Absolutely.
be purpose driven, and so when someone is not and they have a faith, I say, hey, wait, what's going on here? Your faith should be pushing you into areas of your life where not only you're uncomfortable, but areas where you can grow. And sometimes we forget that our faith allows us to have a certain courage that we wouldn't otherwise have had we not had that faith, right? But we got to put it to work. We got to put that courage to work. I tell people all the time, I do things scared to this day. Do it scared. Just do it.
That's right. That's right. I want to thank you as we close our interview for taking the time out of your enormously busy schedule to allow me to interview you as the CEO of my podcast entitled Professor for Life Incorporated. I deeply love you. I deeply honor you. I wish nothing but blessings, God blessings upon all of your passions and endeavors, and anything that I could do to help continue to inspire you and to move you to that college administration, please let me know, because I'm always just a call away. God bless you, and I hope to be talking to you soon.
Thank you so much, Professor.
All right then. God bless you. Bye-bye now.
Bye.